in the interest of our countries nor in the interest of Ukraine. I can't speak for NATO, obviously, but we've heard the same message from its Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg.
Nick Wadhams, Bloomberg.
Thanks very much. Mr. Secretary, first for you on Venezuela, can you just tell us whether the U.S. is considering easing sanctions on Venezuela to get its oil absent of any progress on the negotiations with the opposition? And then second, for both of you on the sanctions and the endgame, you mentioned, Foreign Secretary, that Putin must fail. So is it your strategy now to essentially exert so much pressure on the Russian people, oligarchs around Vladimir Putin, so that Russia will essentially, as Undersecretary Nuland said yesterday, might rise up and, I don't know what, potentially overthrow him? Do you believe now that it's simply impossible for the United States to have a productive or stable relationship with Russia if Vladimir Putin remains in power either during or once this conflict is over? Thank you.
I'm happy to start. Nick, with regard to Venezuela, we have a set of interests with Venezuela. They include, of course, supporting the democratic aspirations of the Venezuelan people. They include securing the release of Americans who are unjustly detained there. And happily last night, as you heard, 2 Americans, Gustavo Cardenas and Jorge Fernandez, were released. They had been wrongfully detained. They're now reunited with their families. And it's also true that we have an interest globally in maintaining a steady supply of energy, including through our diplomatic efforts. So all of these things come to bear when it comes to Venezuela, as well as to other countries around the world where we have a multiplicity of interests and use diplomacy to try to advance them. And again, I have to say I'm very pleased that diplomacy brought 2 unjustly detained Americans home just last night. We will never let up anywhere at any time in the efforts to bring Americans who are unjustly detained back home.
We're very clear that our objective is for Putin to fail in Ukraine. This unwarranted act of aggression must not succeed, and there would be terrible consequences if it did succeed for European and global security. And the purpose of the sanctions is to debilitate the Russian economy, to stop Putin being able to fund his war machine from money gained from the oil and gas industry and from the technology that he's been able to make available. So one of the things we've done, as well as putting huge sanctions on banks and on the SWIFT system, is put in export controls so that the technology that was being used to develop the military-industrial complex is simply not going to Russia. It's also worth saying that we've seen huge action from the private sector, whether it's McDonald's or other companies. And one of the issues in Russia is, of course, the lack of free media, the fact that the Russian people aren't being told the truth. But they will be seeing now, by the fact that shops are closing, they're not able to get the goods that they were able to get, exactly the implications that Putin's aggression in Ukraine is having for Russia.
The only way for Putin to reverse course would be for there to be so much pressure. The people around him, the military leaders, the ordinary people in Russia might rise up against him. So do you believe it's possible to have a stable relationship with Russia if Putin remains in power?
Well, let me say a couple of things to this. First, I think it's important to remember that throughout this crisis created by Putin and Russia, we've sought to provide possible off-ramps to President Putin. He's the only one who can decide whether or not to take them. So far, every time there's been an opportunity to do just that, he's pressed the accelerator and continued down this horrific road that he's been pursuing. He has a clear plan right now to brutalize Ukraine, but to what end? Because when it comes to an end game, the big question in the first instance is what is his end game? We saw the failures of the initial military plan to quickly subjugate the country. That's failed. So he's now turning to a strategy of laying waste to the population centers, to the country. If his goal is to impose some kind of puppet regime by displacing the existing government and putting in place one to his liking, I think it's pretty evident by the response of the Ukrainian people that they will never accept that. And if he tries to enforce such a puppet regime by keeping Russian forces in Ukraine, it will be a long, bloody, drawn-out mess through which Russia will continue to suffer grievously. So our response continues to be to do everything we possibly can to make sure that the Ukrainians have the means to defend themselves, to make sure we do everything we possibly can to exert pressure on Russia and on Putin to change course, to do everything we possibly can, of course, to support those who are suffering as a result of Russia's actions. Ultimately, I'm absolutely convinced that Putin will fail and Russia will suffer a strategic defeat, no matter what short-term tactical gains it may make in Ukraine. As we've said before, you can win a battle, but that doesn't mean you win the war. On the contrary, you can take a city, but you can't take the hearts and minds of its people, and Ukrainians are demonstrating that every single day. So I'm convinced that we will see a strategic defeat of President Putin and the propositions he's put forward. We'll accomplish this by backing Ukrainians in their fight, by remaining united in holding Russia accountable through the devastating sanctions, the diplomatic isolation, and other measures. And we've already seen that Russia's failed in its chief objectives. It's not been able to hold Ukraine. It's not going to be able to hold Ukraine in the long term, again, no matter what the tactical victories it may achieve are. Liz was just saying, economically, the measures that we've taken have erased 30 years of progress integrating Russia into the world. This dramatic exodus of virtually every international company from Russia continues as we speak, and that is having a profound impact not just today, but over the long term. So I think what we're looking at is whether or not President Putin will decide to try to finally cut the losses that he's inflicted on himself and inflicted on the Russian people. We can't decide that for him. All that we can do is to continue this extraordinary effort to increase the pressure on him, increase our support for Ukraine, and achieve what we all want, which is the independence of Ukraine and a defeat for President Putin, because these methods are a fundamental challenge, not only to Ukraine, but to the very principles of international peace and security that our countries have fought and worked to establish over many decades. That's what is at risk here. We're committed to defending them. We're committed to standing for them until we succeed in making it clear that they will hold and Putin's efforts to undermine them will fail.
Finally, can we have David Charter of the Times, please?
Thank you very much indeed. First question to Secretary Blinken. Secretary, it's been reported in the Wall Street Journal today that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have both rebuffed attempts to set up conversations with President Biden in recent days. What does this snub tell us about relations with these two important Gulf states, and what's your message to try and encourage them to produce more oil during this crisis? And to the Foreign Secretary, please. You said a few days ago that you would absolutely support individual Britons going to Ukraine to take part in the fighting. We have reports now of up to 4 British serving soldiers who are in Ukraine, possibly, or on their way. What information can you give us about that, please? And has your message changed as far as they're concerned? And I might just add that in your opening comments, you did talk about asking NATO allies to invest more. Does that mean we can expect that you will push for more defence spending in the UK? Thank you.
Thank you very much. With regard to the Gulf countries, First, we share very important interests with them, from deterring Iranian aggression and Iranian-enabled attacks, whether it's against Saudi Arabia, against the Emirates. We share a strong interest in supporting the UN-backed efforts to end the war in Yemen. We share an interest in ensuring the stability of global energy supplies, and we've had very constructive engagements with those interests in mind. Just yesterday, I spent a fair bit of time on the phone with my Emirati counterpart. We're all talking regularly. I've regularly met with my Saudi counterpart, including in Munich just a few weeks ago. President Biden, spoke with King Salman of Saudi Arabia last month in a discussion that set out a very expansive agenda, and we're now pursuing that agenda with our senior Saudi counterparts. They set out a work plan for us. We're moving forward on it. And I might add, we can do all of this while doing what we said we would do from the outset, which was centering human rights in our foreign policy. These priorities are not mutually exclusive. In fact, for us, they're very much complementary. We're not going to separate our values from our interests. We've made that clear in everything we've done, but we're working productively, constructively with those countries. I think there was just an announcement a short while ago, I'm not sure if it's been made publicly yet, about Emirati support for increased production when it comes to OPEC+, which I think is an important thing to stabilize global energy markets, to make sure that there remains an abundant supply of energy around the world.
I have been very clear that the travel advice from the United Kingdom is not to go to Ukraine. In fact, I repeated that message at the Foreign Affairs Committee earlier this week. There are better ways of helping the efforts in Ukraine, namely donating to the DEC appeal. What I said the other week was expressing support for the Ukrainian cause. They are fighting a just war, and we are doing all we can to support them. On the subject of defence spending, the reality is, across the West, we haven't spent enough on defence for a number of years. And we have seen a build-up of military capability from Russia in terms of both technology and numbers. And I welcome the fact the Germans are now increasing their defence spending. We're seeing other countries follow suit. I'm not going to preempt any future discussions between the Chancellor and the Defence Secretary. But as well as conventional defence, we also need to step up our efforts in areas like information. One of the things that the United States and the United Kingdom have been doing is using information, exposing intelligence we have to call out Putin's playbook, and I think that's been very important. But the fact is that the United Kingdom abandoned its information unit at the end of the Cold War, and the Russians didn't abandon their information unit. So we need to be making sure that on every possible front, whether it's conventional defence, whether it's technology, or whether indeed it's information, we are able to outcompete our adversaries.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.